Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, today we are going to talk about Sam and Bobby McGee. Now, you may be familiar with the song Me and Bobby McGee that Kris Kristofferson wrote and was famously covered by Janis Joplin, but you may not be familiar with the poem The Cremation of Sam McGee. Now, you may be saying, how does a poem about the Canadian Gold Rush written by a Canadian poet have anything to do with Me and Bobby McGee, the song? Well, stay tuned because we're going to figure out why those two are connected. And we're going to talk about what we can learn from both of these works of art. So, with that, sit back and relax, and we'll roll that podcast episode now. All right, so Sam and Bobby McGee, different kind of names, right? That you may have heard of before, may not have heard of before. But let's get in and talk about why we're going to talk about these today. And one of the topics is around synchronicity. And so let me just explain to you what synchronicity is. You may have heard the song Synchronicity 2 from the Police. In fact, there's Synchronicity 1 also, and maybe I'll talk about those in a different episode. But the term is usually credited back to Carl Jung, which was a psychiatrist. And the idea behind synchronicity is that there are two un unrelated and yet related events. They are acausal, meaning that one does not cause the other, but also, besides being acausal, it also has meaning. Okay. And so a lot of what we experience in our life is actually synchronistic. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in the episode. So, again, I'm going to read a little bit from the poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. We're going to talk about the song, Me and Bobby McGee, because I've got a story about how it was written, kind of what was behind it, and also Janis's whole tie-in to this song as well. So interesting story. Stay tuned for that. But let me start off with talking a little bit more about synchronicity because I think it's I've shared with you a little bit before that sometimes when I do these episodes, it's because a song pops in my head, or maybe there's an artist that almost every day I wake up and one of their songs is in my head. And I listen to it over and over and over and over again, right? Realizing that there's something that I need to share about that song, something that I need to learn about that song. And in fact, with both of these things, Sam and Bobby, I've learned some new things that I'll share with you just recently as a result of this. Because again, as we listen to music, as we read poems, as we look at artwork and other things, it takes on different meanings for us depending on where we're at in life, what we're dealing with. And so I'll share some of what it means to me. And hopefully, again, as you're listening to this, you can understand and receive the guidance on what it means to you, right? And how we all can end up improving our lives as a result of this discussion today. So, so that's how a lot of times the podcast episodes come up, but this one was a little different. It was very synchronistic. There were breadcrumbs that I had to follow. And at first, a lot of them didn't seem to make sense because it seemed like I was kind of wandering around and I didn't quite know, what they meant. Okay. And so a few weeks ago, I recorded a live video where I actually read the poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. And like I said, I'll share a little bit more with you here, but I did a whole live video on that because that's one of the poems that has always meant something to me because it was one that my mother used to read to me when I was little. And I always used to love it. There's some quirky reasons why that's the case that I shared more in that other video. But it's one that I could remember a lot of the lines to, and I could recite it to myself. And so, about a week or so ago, I was reciting it again in my head for some reason. I'd done the live video a couple weeks ago, but I was reciting it again in my head, and it starts, "The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the barge of Lake Lamarge, I cremated Sam McGee." And that was going over in my head, right? I was recapitulating on that. For some reason, it had just popped into my head. And I had just been reciting that to myself. I pick up my phone to check my messages, and one of the group chats that I'm on, a friend of mine that lives in northern Michigan had sent some pictures of the northern lights, the auroras that she was seeing, because for the last week or so, they've just been amazing. And so I thought, oh, well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Right? I was just reciting this poem to myself that has the northern lights in it, and then my friend sends me pictures that she has just taken that night at the same time when I was thinking of this poem of the northern lights. And at the same time, other people in groups that I am involved in were posting about the northern lights also. In fact, within an hour or two, I had received pictures from people here in northern Arizona, where I live, in Colorado, in Massachusetts, and like I said, in northern Michigan, pictures of the northern lights. And so, again, right, my thinking about or reciting the poem didn't make the northern lights happen. They didn't make my friend take those pictures and send them to me. So they were acausal, but they have meaning to me. Why? I got to figure it out, right? I got to figure out what the meaning is, but I know that there's some meaning. And so in this group chat that we're a part of, I just kind of sent back and I said, "Thanks for sending the pictures. I was just reciting a poem to myself about the Northern Lights." And someone else in the group said, "Oh, what poem?" And so I replied back, "The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service." And I put that, "The Northern Lights have seen queer sights," in the group. And this person responds back and says, "Oh, Sam McGee, that sounds really familiar. Didn't Janis do something, sing a song about that?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, her song was me and Bobby McGee." And it kind of clicked at that point. Sam McGee and Bobby McGee, same last name, right? So again, a causal in their nature, but something that has meaning for me and something for me to dig more into, right? Now, another synchronistic and interesting thing about that last name, McGee, which is McGee. My maternal grandmother, Lenore, her maiden name was Gee, not McKee, but Gee, right? And so GEE. And so it gave me an opportunity again, as I was experiencing some of these synchronistic events, to think of my great grandmother, Lenore, and to remember kind of my heritage along with that as well. So again, back to the group text, I kind of made that explanation, and 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 I said, actually, it might make a good podcast episode, right? Sam and Bobby McGee. And this person responded back with hearts and everything else, which again, I had to stop and say, okay, I was kind of making a joke, but maybe I wasn't kind of making a joke about it. And so as I've sat with it for the last few days and I've gone back and listened to the song over and over again, it became clear that I do need to do a podcast episode on this. So here we are. right? I'm doing a podcast episode about Sam and Bobby McGee. Okay. So that's just a little, of my process that I've kind of worked through. And again, some understanding of synchronicity. And for you now to start thinking, well, hold it. Am I seeing synchronistic things in my life? What are they trying to tell me? Right? Because the way that Jung talks about synchronicity is, again, they don't cause each thing to happen, but what happens is we're elevating our consciousness into what he called the collective unconscious. And so, multiple people are tapping into this collective unconsciousness and receiving downloads from the universe. Jung called it the collective unconscious. Some people, call it God consciousness. Some people call it universal mind, whatever you want to call it, right? That there are these things that are going on all the time that, again, as we tap into it, it helps to provide meaning and direction in our life. And so, again, there's some things that I've learned that, again, I'll share more in this episode. Things like remembering my great grandmother, as one of the things about one of the lines from the song, Me and Bobby McGee, freedom is, uh, you know, oh, let me get back to it. I got all my stuff up here, right? Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. And that's one of those phrases from that song that I've ruminated on for years, and it's meant different things to me at different points in time. And in fact, now going through this process again, it's meaning some different things to me that I'll share with you a little bit later in the podcast episode. Okay. So let's talk about Sam McGee a little bit, right? Like I said, it was something that my mother used to read to me all the time. I've got the book here, the collected poems of Robert Service, where you can find it. But it's an interesting poem as well because I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of the poem because I don't have time to read the whole thing today, but effectively, these two men were in the Canadian Gold Rush, far up in northern Canada. So they had dog sleds, snow, cold, everything else out there, right? And so, the narrator of the poem is one of the men, and his friend, Sam McGee, is also with him, right? Sam ends up dying and asks his friend, the narrator, for a favor. And so the friend agrees to it. Sam dies, and he effectively has to carry Sam McGee around with him on his dog sled, dead body on the dog sled for days until he could find a place where he could cremate Sam, which was Sam's dying wish. Okay. And at the end, he finds a place to cremate him. He shoves him into this area, lights him up, and could hear his body sizzling and crickling kind of a thing. Which again, as a little kid, I think that's one of the things I really liked was the imagery of that. And so he goes over and he opens the door to see if he's finished burning up. And there is Sam sitting there saying, "Would you please close the door? It's cold out there, and this is the first time I've been warm in a long time. So thank you." Right? Close the door. And so anyway, I'll read a little bit here because I think again there is some lessons and some tie-ins with what we're going to talk about with the song Me and Bobby McGee. And so, as I told you, there are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have seen their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell, right? So here it was, this man that grew up in the South where it's warm and he's fighting the frigid temperatures in the North to go for gold. And so this poem kind of tells a story or a journey of these two men. When we get to the song of me and Bobby McGee, it's a story, it's a travel story of two people as well. And so again, we can look at this and we can think about this and analogize it into the journeys that we are all on. Because the same kinds of things that these characters in the poem and in the song encountered are things that we encounter along our journey. And so we can learn some things from them and apply them into our own journey, right? So I told you, again that Sam was on his way out. And so his dying wish, he said, he turned to me and Cap says I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request. Right. So here is his friend's dying wish. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains. And so again, Sam dies. He puts him on the dog sled and is taking him around. Again, there's ice and snow everywhere, no fuel, So he has to carry this body around with him, carry around this burden with him for days. And there's different points, along here where he really, he says that I loathed that curse and that it seemed like it was something heavy that he had to carry. It was a burden, but he knew that he couldn't just dump Sam off in the snow because he had promised that he would cremate him. And so again, when times get tough, when we want to give up, are we willing to actually, continue on and keep our word and do exactly what we say we're going to do? Are we integral? Are we impeccable with our word? And again, the man in the poem was, um, and I'll just read the last little part of this because I just think it's funny, right? So, I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I look. Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar, and he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, Please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. So the cremation of Sam McGee. And again, like I said, I can't go into the whole thing today. I've got another live video about that, but there are things that we can learn, along our journey. Sometimes we pick up burdens. We make certain promises, right? That maybe we'd like to be free from those promises. And we're going to talk about freedom in a little bit. We're going to talk more about regret as well, because again, in that poem, there was a part where he was feeling regretful about actually promising Sam to do that, right? And again, these are all things that we experience on our journeys as well. So let's now transition over to me and Bobby McGee. Now, if you've heard that song before, you've probably heard the Janis Joplin cover, because that is the most famous of the covers that was done on that song. But let me tell you a little bit about the background of the story and how this ends up tying into Janis Joplin and some things that we can learn from it as well. Now, Kris Kristofferson was a songwriter. He's a singer-songwriter, and he was an actor too. But he was one of those people that he wrote songs, and then usually other people would sing them because he did not believe that he had a very good voice. In fact, we'll get to that here in just a minute. Okay. And so he would write the songs, other people would perform them. And so this was a song that he had written. And let me give you the story kind of behind this whole song and some of the synchronistic events that happened with it as well. And so, if you look it up, Kris Kristofferson is a songwriter, but he gives a man named Fred Foster co-writing credit on it. Meaning, Kris wrote the lyrics and the music, but really Fred gave him the inspiration for the song and the title. And so he gave Fred credit for it. Fred didn't do much else, but he still gave Fred credit. He gave him songwriting credit for it. So again, there's maybe a lesson for us as well, right? There's people that are helping us all the time. Are we giving them credit? Because we can, right? And again, by him giving Fred credit, songwriting credits, those royalties, part of the royalties started going to Fred. And Kris could have said, "Oh, Fred, you just gave me the title. You really didn't, help me with it." But he gave him credit, right? So are we giving other people credit who are inspiring or helping us along the way? So here's the story. Fred Foster, he was a producer for Monument Records, which was the label that Kris Kristofferson was on at the time. And so Fred called up Kris and said, "Hey, I've got an idea for a song for you." He said, well, what he said, or at least quoted in how Kris Kristofferson told the story later, he said, he called one night and said, "I've got a song title for you. It's me and Bobby McGee." I thought he said McGee. Bobby McGee was the secretary of Boudleaux Bryant, who was in the same building with Fred. Then Fred says, "The hook is that Bobby McGee is a she. How does that grab you?" Okay. And so Kris was like, okay, first off, a couple of different things from this, right? He misheard the woman's name. It's McKee, McKee. He heard McGee. Okay. McGee. And so the title of the song became Me and Bobby McGee, not McKee, McGee. Okay. Interesting. But again, an interesting footnote in history, right? And the whole idea that here was Fred saying, "Hey, I got a funny title for a song for you, and it's funny because it's Bobby, Bobby, which is usually a man, but guess what? Bobby's a girl, right?" And so Kris looked at it and he's like, "Well, I usually don't write songs this way, but you're asking me to do it, so let me see what I can come up with," right? And so he had the title, but he didn't have the rest of the song. And so here was again an interesting synchronistic event that happened for Kris Kristofferson. He was watching the movie La Strada, which is Anthony Quinn played in the movie, I guess, called La Strada. I've not seen it. But there is a point in that film where Anthony Quinn's character just breaks down and cries unconsolably. And what had happened is in this movie, he had met up with and fallen in love with this woman. And they went around for a while together, but for some reason, he wanted freedom. And he felt like being in a relationship didn't allow him to be free. And so one night when the woman was sleeping, he just packs up and leaves. Now, he regretted leaving, but he didn't know where she was, right? And so as the movie goes on, Eventually, he meets up with someone who was playing a trombone. And I guess it was the trombone that belonged to this woman that he had fallen in love with. She had a trombone. And so he's like, hey, where did you get that trombone from? And he said, well, there was a woman that came into our village a while ago and she died and gave the trombone to me, taught me how to play it and gave it to me. And so there was this Anthony Quinn character who, again, regretted leaving, regretted thinking he needed freedom and that freedom meant not being in that relationship with the person that he loved. And when he found out that she had died and there would never be an opportunity to rekindle that relationship, the character just broke down sobbing. And so, when Kris saw that scene, he wanted to evoke similar emotions in this song, Me and Bobby McGee. And so, again, if you're familiar with the song, you can see where this comes. And I'm going to get into the lyrics here in just a little bit. Okay. And so, again, so he writes a song, and in fact, he gives it back to Fred, and they're in the office, and Fred's like, "Hey, just a minute, let me go get Bobby." So he goes into the next office and brings in the real Bobby McGee and says, "Hey, Kris wrote a song with your name, and I want him to sing it to you." And again, Kris kind of demurred a little bit and said, "Oh, well, I really don't sing that well, but okay, here you go." And so he sang the song to Bobby, and she loved it. She thought it was wonderful, right? But how much of the time, too, are we like Kris, where we think, well, I'm not really that great of a singer. I'm not really that great of a speaker. I'm not really that great of a whatever, right? And we discount and don't want to do things because we don't think we're good enough. Well, let me tell you, Kris Kristofferson is a great songwriter. He sings well too, right? In my opinion. But how much of the time do we all do this? I know I'm guilty of this at times. I find sometimes where I don't think I'm good enough to do certain things. And that's part of our lessons here on this earth is kind of getting past some of that, right? And so again, I told you he writes a song, gives it to Fred, and they decide that they're going to give it to Roger Miller to record first. And Roger Miller was a big country singer. Um, in fact, if you're familiar, one of my favorite songs from him is called "King of the Road." Trailer for sale or rent, rooms to let, 50 cents. I'm a man of means by no means, king of the road. Anyway, Roger Miller, old country uh, singer. So he recorded it first, I think, in 1969, after Kris recorded it, wrote it. And many other people ended up covering the song as well. So I went back and I listened to a lot of the different covers of this song. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, I think, uh, uh, Willie Nelson, lots of different people. In fact, even I found a Grateful Dead and I guess Pink. And obviously, most people are familiar with the Janis Joplin version. Okay. And so let's get into that right now. Let's get into the lyrics, what we can learn from the song, and how Janis ends up coming into this as well. And so, Janis's version, which is interesting because again, Kris wrote the song with Bobby being a female character, but obviously Janis was female, so she flipped the gender and made Bobby into a man in her version. All the other versions that I could see, at least the older versions, Pink might have used Janis's version too, but the older versions had Bobby as female. Okay. But let's go into the lyrics a little bit because again, I think that there are lots of lessons for us here upon our journey in life as we can see the journey that Bobby McGee is going through with this person. So it starts off right, busted flat in Baton Rouge, waiting for a train. I was feeling near as faded as my jeans. Bobby thumbed a diesel down just before it rained and rode us all the way to New Orleans. Okay. So again, we start the song with two people. They got a flat tire outside of Baton Rouge. And so they thumbed down a diesel truck that took them on to New Orleans. Right. And so the next verse, they were singing songs in the truck with the driver as they were going to New Orleans. And and then it gets to the line that I told you about, right? Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing don't mean nothing, honey, if it ain't free. And feeling good was easy, Lord, when he sang the blues. Feeling good was good enough for me. Good enough for me and my Bobby McGee. Okay, the chorus, right? So freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. That is a phrase that has been in my mind for many, 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 many years. Okay. Because I am one who wants freedom. Freedom is one of my top values. And so I have always wanted freedom. Now, I think most of us misinterpret what freedom actually is. And so, just like in that movie, La Strada, just like in this song, a lot of times people feel that being in an attached relationship or being attached to another person by being in relationship with them means they can't be free. That's not what it means, right? I felt that way for a lot of my life. Now, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose, which means, again, to truly be free, we have to let things go. We have to not be attached. Now, when I say that, you're going to go, what? I thought you just said, oh, just a minute, right? Okay. Freedom means letting go and having nothing left to lose, but it doesn't mean not being attached. It means not having attachment. Okay, so here's the difference. If you are attached to something, then you will regret when it's gone. You will be in regret. You will be in depression, in sadness, in other things because you don't have that thing. And so that is not freedom. And just like the Anthony Quinn character thinking, hey, I want my freedom, so I'm going to leave this person in the middle of the night. But the minute that he did it and he thought that he had freedom, he didn't have freedom. Why? Because he was still attached. He still had regret. He still wanted to be with this woman. In fact, clear up until he found out that he could physically not be with her again because she had died. At which point he had to let go and the emotions came out, right? And so, it's interesting, again, as we think about a lot of what we're taught freedom is not really what freedom is. And so, again, I know that it now has a different meaning to me because I used to be that way too. I used to think, well, I can't be attached, or if I'm in a relationship, then I'm not free. But that's not what it means. Okay. And I'm learning what this is. And so again, for you, it's, you can sit there and think, well, what does freedom mean to me? And am I confusing what freedom really is? because a lot of times we'll give up things, we'll just throw everything out, start over, burn down our lives, thinking that that's going to give us freedom, but it doesn't if we're still attached. And so, one point is, though, if you want freedom, you have to be willing to let go. You have to let go to be free. You have to not have attachment to be free. But that doesn't mean not caring. It means at the same time caring and not caring, which again, I know is one of those sayings kind of on the spiritual path that a lot of people are like, I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying two things at the same time. Well, you got to figure it out. You need to learn what that means to care and to not care at the same time. May mean something different to you than it does to me, but that's again where we're at, right? So freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Now, in here too is feeling good was easy, Lord, when he sang the blues. And I think this is an interesting line for a couple of reasons. Is the blues are obviously a genre of music, and they're great. I love the blues. And the blues, you can sing the blues when you're sad. You can sing the blues when you're happy. It's a very interesting thing. In fact, I think B.B. King said something to that effect, right? That when I'm feeling happy, I sing the blues. When I feel sad, I sing the blues. Right? Because he was a blues artist. And there's something about the music, about the notes that are used, about the way the music is structured, that it can ease you when you're feeling sad, but it can also intensify feelings of happiness as well at the same time. And so I think it's easy, again, so we're getting this imagery of Bobby singing the blues in this semi truck, and it's feeling good was easy. Feeling good was easy when he was singing the blues, right? And good enough for me and my Bobby McGee, right? Feeling good was good enough. I think that's a great lesson too, is, a lot of times we are constantly going after something, searching for something else. I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when. If I just have this, if I just have that, if this person would just stop being that way. What if feeling good was good enough? Just where you're at presently, just feeling good, feeling peaceful, having that peaceful, easy feeling, right? Being in the present moment, being at peace, being happy, being in a state of well-being, right? And if you need to sing the blues to get there, if you need to chant, one of the reasons I love music is because music is an easy way for you to get to that feeling, right? Because music and sound and vibration has a way of working with our psyche and with our emotions to be able to help us feel certain ways and get out of certain emotions and get to feel the way we want to feel, right? You want to feel excited, go listen to I'm So Excited from the Pointer Sisters, right? That'll get you excited if you're into it, right? If you want to feel depressed, there's plenty of depressing songs out there if you want to feel depressed. But, find music or find things that help you to feel the way you want to feel. Because feeling good is enough. If we could feel good every day, every minute of every day, and be at that place of well-being, our life is perfect. Now, I know the reality is we can't do that. We have 9 to 5 jobs. We have things that we're working through, karmic things. And sometimes it's hard for us to stop and just feel good. But the more we can do that, the more we can practice doing that, the more we can actually just relax, let it go, realize that everything always has been, is now, and always will be okay. We've made it through everything that's happened so far. Everything is fine. Even death is fine. Right? Let's go back to our poem. Sam McGee finally got warm. He died. He was feeling good, sitting there, right? That again, that's nothing for us to fear. So, as we go on in the song, from the Kentucky coal mines to the California sun, right? Bobby shared the secrets of my soul through all kinds of weather, through everything we done. Hey, babe, hey, Bobby, baby, kept me from the cold. And so, again, there was obviously this relationship that went on for a while. These two traveled around the country together. In fact, for me, again, a synchronistic thing. The places that are mentioned in here: Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Kentucky coal mines, California sun, and Salinas in particular. Those are all places that I have been as well, right? But it's interesting again how, Bobby baby kept me from the cold. These people obviously had a good relationship. Something was clicking between them. But then the next verse, right? One day up near Salinas, Lord, I let him slip away. He's looking for that home, and I hope he finds it. And so, again, apparently Bobby was probably the one from this song who decided, hey, I need some freedom. I need to go home. I can't be with you anymore. And slipped away, just like Anthony Hopkins slipped away in the night, thinking that he was going to get freedom, when in fact that wasn't freedom, right? Freedom instead is being authentically you. It's about being respectful, about learning how to have relationships with other people, how to work through challenges that may be there, right? And realizing that we are still a sovereign entity. We're still a sovereign being. I think that's where a lot of times when people feel like they don't have freedom, it's because they have given up being themselves and they're only living for the other person. And that can be, I can see why that's not freedom. I've been in that situation before. But if we can be authentic, if we can be uh, our true self, our higher self, our loving and kind self, and realize again that we're, learning how to be in relationships with other people as long as we can. But when the relationship ends, we can let it go. We don't have to have attachment with it because we realize that we're enough. We're enough by ourselves. We don't need to be codependent on someone else. We're fine. But when we're that way in a relationship, it's totally different than when you're codependent in a relationship. Freedom versus not freedom, right? And again, think about it, mill it over in your head for years if you need to, like I have, so that you can understand and get the meaning that you need from what freedom is. And then, another point from this song to bring up is, at the end of that, where it says, but I'd trade all of my tomorrows for one single yesterday. I'd trade all of my tomorrows for one single yesterday. To me, that's a very sad, sad line because it shows regret. It shows regret, right? I trade all of my tomorrows for one single yesterday. And, again, as I said, a lot of times we think that we're getting freedom by burning things down, by leaving relationships, by quitting jobs, by moving across the country or the world. That's going to change everything. But it doesn't, because it usually ends up leading to regret, or it can lead to regret. And why do we feel that regret? Because we still have attachment. We still have attachment. If we didn't, we wouldn't be in a place of regret. And so for someone, again, it's a beautiful line. Kris Kristofferson, thank you for coming up with that line, because I think it very eloquently captures what a lot of us feel. Do you feel regret in your life? Probably. I have. I do sometimes. I get out of it as quick as I become aware of it, because that's not a place that I want to be. Regret, shame, depression, those are not feelings and emotions that I want to be in. And so when those come up, we have to let go. We have to let go and let God, right? As some people will say, let go and let God take over, right? And so, again, as we're going through life, yeah, are there things I wished I would have done different? Maybe. But if I had done them different, I would not be the person I am today. And so it is very selfish of me to have regrets. Okay, I'm going to say that again. It's very selfish of me to have regrets. Why? Because I should be grateful for who I am today. And I am. I'm grateful for who I am. I'm grateful for the experiences that I've gone through. And so I shouldn't have regret. Right? Now, sometimes we still get back into it. As soon as we become aware of it, let's get out of it, because you know what? Our best days are yet to come. You know, we just always need to kind of keep going that way. Now, let me get back to the story of the song, right? So that's kind of the lyrics and some of the things that we learn about regret, about wanting freedom, about sometimes isolating ourselves in that search for freedom. But let's get back to the story about the song itself, because again, there are things for us to remember and to learn. And so I told you that, Kris wrote the song, Roger Miller covered it first, a lot of other people covered it. And so, when you do a cover, the artist doesn't necessarily have to go ask permission from the person who wrote it. They just have to pay him. And the record companies and keep track of who gets paid for each of the songs, because whoever the songwriter is gets their cut. And so, a lot of times the songwriter has no idea who's going to cover their song, or that their song has even been covered, until either they hear it on the radio or they get the royalty check. And so I remember, there's a story about Dolly Parton, because Dolly Parton is another one who people don't realize, but Dolly is a huge songwriter. She's written hundreds of songs. I think when I was doing some research, it was like 400 to 600 songs, something like that she's written, many of which have actually been covered or were given to other people that she didn't even sing herself. She just wrote it. Somebody else performed it. And so I remember her, one day she was listening to the radio and she heard this Whitney Houston song come on. And I will always love you. Okay, I can't do the Whitney proper there. But anyway, it was a song that Whitney had covered for the movie The Bodyguard, that was actually written by Dolly Parton. Now that went on to be the Bodyguard soundtrack, was one of the top selling albums of all time. And so when Dolly heard that on the radio, she's like, "Oh, that's my song." And I'm sure she's been very happy with the royalties that have come from that song. So anyway, covering of the songs, right? Kris writes it, people start covering it. He goes on about his life. And Janis sees a song, she likes it. She changes the lyrics a little bit, again, like I said, to make Bobby into a man, right? So she's singing about her lover, Bobby, if you will, the man in the song. And so she comes up with it and she ends up recording the song. She goes into the studio, records the song. And obviously, if you've heard that song, you've heard that version. But here's the rest of the story, okay? Is that what ended up happening is go back here. So I get the right stuff for you here. That Janis recorded it. And so again, obviously, I mean, when you record it, it takes months of editing usually and other stuff before it ever ends up coming out. So Janis goes into the studio and she records it for her upcoming album. I think it was called Pearl, that was supposed to be coming out very soon. So she had picked that as one of the tracks on this album. So she records it, and 3 days later, she is dead of a heroin overdose. So Janis Joplin, right? Lovely Janis Joplin. You want to talk about an authentic person who lived life out loud, that is probably in a lot of ways, a good example of how we can be more authentic. But not probably everything in her life, okay? But Janis was Janis. She had this voice, she had this energy, she had this charisma about her. And in fact, I think the record executives on her label, I think it was Capitol, I can't remember, um, were surprised because they didn't think of her as being someone to sing Me and Bobby McGee. She was more of a hard rocker, kind of person. But they did up the version. She went in and recorded it. And like I said, 3 days later, she was dead. And so this was probably, it may have been the last song she recorded. I don't know. But 3 days after recording it, Janis is gone. Janis is gone 3 days later. And so here's the rest of the story is a day after Janis died, Kris Kristofferson got a call from the record company, from Janis's record company, and said, come in, we want you to listen to something. And so Kris comes in and, sits down and they start playing Janis's track, Me and Bobby McGee, that she had just recorded. And obviously Kris knew that she just died the day before. And he sits down and they start playing it. And he can't even make it through the whole song. And he gets up, bawling, and leaves. And he wanders around the streets of LA for hours, just sobbing uncontrollably. And when I read this story, I was doing the same thing. So here we go, right? Just sobbing. And he went back home or went to the studio, I can't remember which, and he just played that song over and over and over and over and over again until he could do it without having the emotion, right? Because sometimes, again, it's hard to perform certain songs because the emotion takes over. So why was Kris doing that? Why am I doing it right now? Because I think sometimes when we create things, we don't really realize the impact that they're going to have, what it's going to mean to the world, and who it was actually written for. Right? When Kris wrote that song, it's kind of a joke at first, right? Hey, 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 it's funny, right? Because she's a girl. He writes a song though that's very serious and deals with serious topics from the movie that I referred to, right? Very serious song. But then he kind of let it go because again, he wrote the song, he did perform it, he recorded it, but It was mainly for other people to record. And guess who he really wrote that song for? He really wrote it for Janis. Okay. There's certain songs that have been written by other people that the performance by someone else is why it was written. Another example of that is Hurt, the song Hurt, written by, I can't remember which one of the guys in Nine Inch Nails, recorded and wrote it and recorded Hurt. And at the end of Johnny Cash's life, he wanted to cover that song. And they're like, you're Johnny Cash, you can do whatever you want, right? You want to cover my song? Great. And if you've ever listened to that version of Johnny Cash, the song Hurt, and you watch the video, that song was written for Johnny Cash because it really encapsulated his life. Okay. Me and Bobby McGee, that was written for Janis. Why? She did some interesting things in it. If you listen to the other country versions, they're very kind of slow and almost sad. But hers is not quite that way, especially towards the end. It comes upbeat. There's some organ music and other stuff that's going on. It's making you kind of tap your foot. That even this sad song, there's hope, there's joy, there's happiness in it at the end. And Janis just slipped through our fingers one day in LA from overdosing. And I think that's why Kris was so moved. And that's why I was so moved. Because as I thought about it more, I realized Janis was Bobby McGee, right? She slipped away. And obviously, we can feel regret. Uh, maybe I don't know exactly what was going through Kris's mind, but I'm thinking maybe it was some of what I was, that here she was. Interesting side note too. So I told you it was only 3 days after she recorded it that she died. Her biggest hit was Me and Bobby McGee. And it was released posthumously, which means after her death. That actually her biggest hit came after her death. And sometimes this happens. Otis Redding, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, was another one. That was, I think, the #1 best-selling posthumous release. Another one was John Lennon's Watching the Wheels. That was actually released after his death, too. But so where are we going with all this, right? Is that I think another lesson in this, too, is that sometimes we're doing things to help other people, or we don't realize the synchronistic part that we are in other people's learnings, in other people's successes, what have you, right? Because again, there were a lot of synchronicities that led to Kris writing that song. The joke from Fred about, hey, Bobby's a girl, right? And here's the title. And then he goes and watches this movie and tries to have some emotion based on that, right? Writes the song and doesn't even realize that Janis picks it up and kind of makes it her own. But that's just how life works, right? And it's all of these synchronistic little breadcrumbs along the trail that if we're willing to listen, if we're there, if we're actually listening and making meaning out of these synchronistic activities, then we know where to go. And sometimes we don't know right away. We know when we know. So it's the same thing, right? Why have I been thinking about freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose? for probably 20 years now. Why has that been on my mind for 20 years? Well, it kind of meant some things to me at one point, but I didn't quite understand it. And now I think I understand it in a different way. And if I listen to this song 5 years from now, it's probably going to mean something different to me as well. Right. So there's some synchronicity. And sometimes it's kind of a call to action. Again, it was kind of a joke that I said, well, maybe that'll be another podcast episode. Ha ha ha. Right. Well, ha ha ha, maybe not. Right. Because then again, as I sat with it, it's like, no, you really got to do a podcast episode on this. And I still, for a day or two, kept putting it off because I knew I was probably going to break down in this. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to say or how I was going to say it. Because, again, sometimes those things creep in. No, Jason, you're not good enough. You don't quite know what to say. You're not going to say it quite the right way. And I just have to push those aside and just do it. Right. Which again, unedited, I was coughing, taking a sip of coffee in this because it's just me talking and being authentic and real with you. I don't want to polish everything up and make you feel like I'm perfect. Because believe me, I ain't perfect, right? And every day I'm trying to be more authentically myself. And every day I hope that you're trying to be more authentically yourself, that you'll have the courage to listen to these synchronistic messages from the universe, that you're tapping into the collective unconscious, that you're learning what it is that you need to learn, but that you're there doing what you're doing. Because when you're doing what you're doing, it has an impact on other people, right? I'm sure Kris had no idea that that song would be as popular as it was until Janis picked it up. And maybe it wouldn't have been as popular as it was if Janis hadn't died. I don't know, right? But I know that that song has brought meaning to a lot of people over the years. That's why it's so popular. That's why when I listen to it, I get emotional. When I think of Janis Joplin, I get emotional, right? Because of her life that was seemingly cut short, but was it? Right? Because again, it's a lot of lessons for all of us. And the beautiful thing is we have her music, right? The beautiful thing is we have all this music. I just, did a meme on Facebook. I listened to Dead People, right, with the little kid from The Sixth Sense on it, right? And it's got pictures of musicians who have died because, that's the point is we all leave a mark. We all, by being who we are authentically, we're impacting ourselves, but we're also impacting everyone else around us. And so, again, going to wrap up. I think it went a little bit longer. I don't even know how long I went on this episode because I don't time them, right? I just talk until I think I don't need to talk anymore. And I think that's about where I'm at. So relax, get some of that peaceful, easy feeling in your life. Think about some of the topics that we discussed today, some of the lessons that we learned, both from, synchronicity, about the poem, about the song, about how the song was written, the rest of the story about the song, and to really think about what freedom means to you, and how you um, yourself can actually realize that feeling good is easy and feeling good is really all that matters. But it's not feeling good by being distracted. It's not feeling good by shooting yourself up with heroin. It's feeling good with yourself. It's being comfortable with and loving yourself. It's about being in the present moment, about loving other people, about realizing that you're enough and you're perfect just the way you are. We don't need to have these inferiority complexes. We're perfect exactly as we are. And everything is perfect exactly the way it is, right? So with that, I'm going to wrap up for this week, but go out and have a great week. May you be blessed. May some of the things from today spark something in you to make some changes in your life so that you can get that peaceful feeling, so you can get rid of things like regret and isolation and other things that may creep into your life, and actually just feel at peace and be love and share love. And I wish you all the best. We'll see you on the next episode. Have a great rest of your week.